just wanted to pass along to you. Okay. That they're at Linda's opening tonight. And they wanted to come to here, but then they also wanted to go to Linda's opening and they didn't know how to do both. So
That's perfect. We'll
Yeah.
post the recording because I think a lot of people are gonna really enjoy this / need it. Which now I'm talking to those people. Hello, future people who aren't in this call. Welcome to Critical Theory, a program run by Da Vinci Art Alliance, in which we, as a group and community, read all sorts of art philosophy and art history and various slightly heady material that we love to talk about and really kind of have an opportunity to explore some of these more complex works as a group. So it's really wonderful to have everybody here. And this time around, we have the wonderful privilege of reading this lovely piece of literature written by our very own David Deakin, explaining some of the theory behind his wonderful 2-floor exhibition, Mind Carnival at Da Vinci Art Alliance right now. So that being said, before we jump too far in it, without giving too much away, David, is there anything that you want to kind of set us up with before we jump into talking about how our experience reading this article went? Do we need to prime us in any fashion?
Well, obviously, by writing this, the intention was to provide kind of, we talk about like behind the curtain mindset that is behind what the carnival and what the actual exhibit manifests, visually and viscerally, because it was always, it has been for me a wonderful experience deciding that art was actually going to be like the focus of my thought and my life, but not in the sense of the traditional sense. And I think I tried to make it clear that there's that traditional sense I find has huge limitations with regard to what I consider the power that art really brings to our humanity. So this, that's why it's called an art conception. It's just like what came out in the old brain well, what if? And I think that just sort of underlies it, and that's why I always refer to and to think I saw it on Mulberry Street. It's this act of imagination. I mean, the whole thing is just this big act of imagination that could very much feel and mimic that wonderful first Dr. Seuss book. That here's a kid that goes out into life, and it's like, like run this urn, and and it's like, so see this. Then you see that, and it's just like, oh, okay, this, and so he builds this wonderful world, and then he comes back home and it's like, well, what did you see? Oh, nothing, Dad. Well, I also said that I totally identified with that funny little children's story that Mind Carnival is that big creation of imagination, as I say, that has foundation in reality, but it's more of a vision of what, you know, what might be, kind of thing. So that's what I've been trying to make clear. You know, it's just an overactive imagination thinking about what might be.
Yeah, and I love that you end this reading with a lot of that sentiment of imagination and what are like actionable steps that we can take to, you know, counteract some of the kind of art market systems that you faced firsthand in your career, and, you know, imagining new models of organizations that I find really exciting. But I don't want to jump entirely to the end before getting through all of the beginning and middle. So with that in mind, I want to open it up to everybody here, and as I always do, and some initial reactions to this reading. I'd love to start to hear them. I have plenty, but I want to open the floor up to everyone else before we jump too deep into it. So what do we think?
Amazing. When I walked in the other day, I had some inkling of what might be, but not really. I had first seen David's Word was the piece that I first saw at the group show a couple of years ago. And I thought, now here's a mind making art. Yes, not just, you know, being whatever, you know, something to draw you in. The choice of volumes that he used made me laugh. I mean, starting with the Prince and sort of realizing, boy, this is pretty much how it's laid out, how Western culture has evolved. Frightening in its way. And of course, getting more deeply into David's work and realizing it's a warning of you know, what is possible as well if, you know, we somehow don't clean up our act, because we're the most voracious species on the planet. We only keep around the mammals and other species that we can eat, and a few in a zoo. But, you know, it's tragic what humanity as a species is doing to this planet. So that's sort of my, it confirmed my own worst fears, shall we say, in many ways. And yet it allowed that sense of divine comedy humor, if you want to call it that. I don't know. I'm speechless.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of like funny balance between like the wonder and allure of a carnival, you know, fun games, accessible, with an almost kind of cautionary tale and warning that goes on the other side of that coin of bright flashing lights, bright colors, this the seductive quality of all of that visual noise, and sometimes, you know, audio noise. I think is really wonderfully teased out in even the neon sign that's out in the front of the gallery, that is kind of like satirically, you know, pumping these like phrases out into the public, you know, CEO before child. You know, obviously we don't believe that, but like that's the warning, and it communicated through just like the harshest neon lights possible in this kind of ticker tape style is very appropriate, I think, to start everyone off into the exhibition. But in regards to the reading, though, I'm curious into how it read for some of the folks here. Was it you know, challenging to read? Do you have any immediate questions? I'd love to hear about how that experience of reading it went for some of you guys.
Well, I'll jump in. It took me several passes to penetrate, but you know, I was reading it again this afternoon, and it certainly is it makes a lot of sense. I mean, the terms that David describes about the art realm and the art as the object, the work of art, although that phrase, I kept tumbling over because I was reading work as noun, because you hear the phrase work of art so frequently that I kept reading that as the thing, but obviously he'd already described the thing in another paragraph. So, but you know, that's a minor quibble about words. But what struck me this time in reading it were two things. One is the section where you're opposing or putting up in parallel art and science. And I found that really interesting. And then the final ending where you're basically saying, you know, it's impossible for mere mortals to make, to find our way through the art realm intact. And so we need, and I keep thinking of Da Vinci, you know, we need, you know, more places like Da Vinci where we can just come do our thing. But I would like to hear you expound a bit more about this opposition or the parallelism of art and science.
Okay, I guess that's, you know, in my ballpark then. What the point I think I was trying to make is that science evolved, you know, like pretty much in Western culture from the Renaissance on, and it became this system of pursuing knowledge, pursuing understanding, and this attempt to further open up our minds beyond like dogmatic programs that had dominated Western culture, you know, from the early Christian period on. In the course of the 20th century, starting with the late 19th century, the whole fabric of culture, in Western culture, has gone on, you know, this amazing transformation. And in the course of that, the original foundations of art as providing kind of representations of cultural thinking, which came pretty much, you know, from the top down. So, you know, you have all these gorgeous Titians and Caravaggios and, you know, all these kind of like questionable pornographic art that was a part of a tradition of art as a craft. It's the 20th century really, where it's just like, because of, you know, photography and all the things that happen, that, well, wait a minute, early 20th century artists, it's like, well, you know, art obviously is more than a record of, or, you know, of things. It is actually a way of understanding and knowing. And that has grown over the course of the century. That that's why I make the note that kind of, well, science, you know, is wonderful as a system of knowledge. Religion has its strengths, but also has huge weaknesses. What were philosophy the same way. All of these are efforts to our efforts as humans to understand, you know, our existence. What's been so fascinating in the 20th century is the evolution of art from just this aesthetic discipline creating these things or these objects, these representations, if you will, from its role literally as, we've talked about this in critical theory before, its role as actually producing objects that are commodities, to its role as a way in which we understand our existence. Art is a way of knowing. It goes way beyond the object. We've talked about this in critical theory, and even in book club, how when you go into the studio and you are in the process of what we call making art, something happens. Something that is unique, and it isn't. My contention is that process is the process of learning, and it's a process of knowing, and mostly it's been reflected internally that it's all about the artist, where in fact it's about our humanity. And I think the point I'm trying to make is that we who practice these practice art, if you will, are doing the same thing that scientists are doing, in that it's a system that we use to expand our knowledge. And that's why I think the correlation between art and science is so strong.
Mm-hmm. I really love this sentence here where you say the significant difference from science is that art embodies experience and science explains experience. And that piggybacked onto what you're just talking about is, art and science are two similar systems that have a lot in common, but look at the world from a slightly different perspective, and therefore are necessary to not only activated human culture that we are familiar with in this day and age, but is wonderful to be versed and have a society that can work within both. And they seem incredibly codependent from the way that you've kind of described this here, which I really love. This whole kind of assumptions section is just like wonderful. I've like highlighted every word of it and just like, yes. And I really appreciate how you, one, define a lot of these kind of terms that you use here, because that's often a often overlooked point of contention, but I feel like that it's laid out very clearly here, and then tying your perspectives of how you don't necessarily make art, but rather use art and use other systems of representation, to communicate these ideas. I find incredibly interesting, and I'm really excited about this this paper as a model, not only for art making, but to take me through this exhibition, which has been so wonderful. Sam and Liv, how are you guys feeling?
I'm absorbing.
Absorbing? Okay. There's a
Yeah.
lot to absorb here. So that is very fair. No, that's wonderful. I think in the realm of defining things, David, could you talk a little bit about how you're using the word sensate a bit? I think that it's heavily leaned on in this, and I think it's not always a term that is widely used. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on how you're using this word and also thinking about it, if you would be so kind.
Well, the key here is, again, the point is to think the art relies upon, first of all, our total sensate response to something, whereas science, has made an effort, concerted effort, to come up with a system of communication that belies the sensate. It is an incredibly abstract system. It is removed from all of the emotive, all of the feeling, all of the sensate, I call it, which is how our body and our minds and react in any given situation, and they react first and foremost through our senses, and then and art is the only discipline out there that recognizes that. There's no other discipline out there that we use that recognizes that first and foremost, how we communicate to one another is through our senses. And it's not just, the five senses, it's that total sensation. It's the emotive that happens, that kind of like nebulous feeling, all of that, that in philosophy, they like deal with like what they call metaphysics. It's just like, oh, what is it? And then I found that in studio practice and in encounters again with critical theory and talking with Da Vinci members, is that, well, when you start to try to articulate what happens when you are taking like what I call undifferentiated materials and embody them. Isn't that what life is? And isn't art, the essence of that? And so shouldn't that experience have a much more important role to play in how we define our culture? It's while we end up having to, because it's sensate, we end up making things. We we create objects, but we embody those objects, and it's just, isn't that what I mean, it's like you go out and see a beautiful sunset, and you go like, doesn't that embody some innate sensate quality about how wonderful life is? And it's something science can't do. Religion can't do it. That's part of the reason I think we're up Schitt's Creek. We haven't paid enough attention to art.
I mean,
and I think as artists, we've been sucked down the capitalist line that it's about creating commodities, and it's about heroes, it's about genius, it's not about that's a huge deception. Art is a bunch of women getting together in the South creating these amazing quilts. There's all these wonderful examples out there of what art really is, and it isn't the crap that ends up in museums only, and it does, it's only because, the markets can't find enough, else to invest in, kind of thing. It just completely misses the point of what I think art contributes, to our humanity.
I want to add into that point, since you kind of you've stopped at it here, is that on the first page you say that art is a method for the exploration of life phenomena, and I find that really wonderful, in that it in many ways diametrically opposed to science.
Yeah.
And it's interesting you brought up religion, because I don't know how I feel about that yet, in that religion doesn't attempt to do this in some way, or maybe kind of like attempt to do it in a different way. But I feel like it's somehow, in many ways, exists between art and science, or maybe kind of like a third point in that triangle often, certainly kind of historically as well. But I would say that it deals with the exploration of life, and maybe even afterlife too, perhaps. But all of these things are certainly kind of a phenomena. It is either interpreting, measuring, or subjectively investigating the experience of life, of what it's like to be a human, and all of the various complicated things that happen after that point. And
Well,
yeah.
Art sent me a lovely email, and one of the things that we discussed in a little exchange that we had, was this role that religion plays, and it's incredibly important to acknowledge what I consider this, what we call the spiritual aspect, if you will, the metaphysical aspect. It's that it has been the impetus for much of what we would call art. It is that in a way that maybe art actually is this attempt to embody, and that's why I use that word, embody the full range of our experience, and that range it includes mystery, it includes an enigma, and there's no room for mystery in science. And one of the things that organizing religion does is like, well, we'll explain the mysteries. So they end up with this kind of dogmatic frame in which, well, that explains it all. But see, no, it's not the explanation. So both I fault religion for losing its touch with the sense of trying to embody that sensation of the mystery of life and the wonder of life, and force it into some kind of dogmatic thing that ends up being like power structure and blah, 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 and it's just like lost its way, and that again, I in the course of my lifetime, I've looked around and I just can't see any other discipline other than the arts that continually push against the subjection, the denigration of that aspect of our lives. I mean, that's why I'm so avid about art. Well, but it's, I think it's, we need to rethink as artists. We need to rethink, about what we're doing and how we go about doing it. And that's again, why the whole interactive aspect of Da Vinci is so good. And that's why I'm a big advocate of Città dell'Arte, organizations of artists who say like, okay, yes, you end up making objects, but the object isn't to make objects. The object is to create an embodiment that reflects, the absolute marvelous dimension of existence.
I think like also, I've been trying to figure out how to word this throughout what you were saying, because I feel when you think about where religion has gone into this very like dogmatic and like packed into a box thing that is very exclusive, like if you're not following a certain set of rules or fitting into like that specific place's idea of how you're supposed to behave, you're not always included there. And I do think that the art community behaves in a similar way a lot of the time. Or just even in terms of like what is like acceptable art versus unaccepted, or people who are kind of like outsiders or didn't go through an education within the art field. Like I think most of us have. There is this idea of like, well, I'm not worthy of being a part of that world, because there is this idea of like exclusivity, I think, from people on the outside. But like, I think it is a foundational core of human beings to express themselves in art because of this like mysticism that is within the idea of like communication, art as a communication tool of what's going on inside, and you trying to explain that to other people, whether it's a very rigid, like, this is my political ideology and I am trying to communicate this to you, and maybe you'll make an action step based on what I'm saying, or just like, this is how I think about color theory and let's explore it, or not, no part of that, just like, I'm making a collage from magazines because I think it's pretty. And like, I think that leads to further thinking, but that's the base step, right? So I would say most of us, if not all of us, started at that base step in like elementary school of just coloring. And we moved to where we are now. And like this like exclusivity could lead for someone who may find this world never finding it because of the idea that they can't fit into it. Am I making sense?
I think
Yes, you are.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Honestly, I just like that way of describing it was so wonderful in that it related to religion, because the entire time, I think Bill mentioned, Bill or Alden mentioned like divine comedy. And the way that you've kind of described, you know, this kind of base level of like art making as like the first realm of purgatory, and the whole idea of purgatory in the Dante's Divine Comedy is to like ascend through even more kind of like stages that are increasingly more difficult and complicated to eventually kind of end up in this kind of like peak experience or place, because being in purgatory is really hard, and you're there for a really long time, and some people, you know, don't ascend. Some people get stuck, and it goes through the whole stories of people getting stuck in these places, and it's great if you love to color, and like that's wonderful, but like doing the work and pushing that even further like gets you closer to good old Mount Celestia.
Well, and I think that
Well-
that's my struggle. Wait, am I interrupting you, Bill?
Go, yeah. But go ahead.
You go. I just talked. You go.
So I love what you just said, Sam, and this is something that we had our first meeting last night of, we don't even know what we're calling ourselves yet, but the Celine, Bill Timmons, me, Mike Payball, David Costa, whatever we're doing a year from December, some kind of community diversity inclusion show. So part of what we were talking about, we have to come up with a name, obviously, but one of the things we were talking about is this notion of there is a gate. We may not think of ourselves as gatekeepers of the art world, but there are people who feel like either they're not worthy, or this trope that, oh, I don't know anything, I'm not creative, I can't do anything. I hate hearing people say that, because I feel like what David is telling us is, as a human being, we have creativity in us. That's part of who we are. That's part of the human condition, of this imagination, creativity, openness to understanding the world around us. And somehow that gets shut down. And maybe it's in our educational system. Maybe it's, you know, parents who are striving the wrong way and tell their kids, no, you can't be an artist, you'll never make a living at that, you've got to be a get your MBA, you have to be a doctor, you have to be a lawyer, you have to make your $1 million, all of which is bullshit. But somehow that gets shut down. And so how do we, I think part of what David is asking us to consider is how do we, as an institution, as Da Vinci, open up? How do we, we say our mission is community through art. How do we actually get people to realize they have artistic creativity inside them and come join us? I don't know. That's a big conundrum for me.
And that's the thing too, is that when you do see events like that, it's like, come play with sidewalk chalk. And I don't think it's usually like public events that are like not really committal, that you just like go and you make this like silk screened object that someone already made.
You mean like color wheels?
Yeah, it's just like I think color wheels for kids is an incredible opportunity for them to be exposed to printmaking. But for adults, I think it's like, oh, that's cute, I have a tote bag now, or a poster, or
Right.
I'm outside of Da Vinci drawing a dog with chalk, and then I'm gonna walk away and go to John's Water Ice now. I think you have to empower people, not just have these like one-off activities that are kind of floofy things, but like really empower the individual to view themselves as an artist and not be scared of it. Like I was in a Zoom call a couple months ago. I did, I might have already talked about this. Sorry if I'm repeating myself, in a previous Critical Theory. Yeah, I did the Artist Way, which I do once a year. But I was in a reading group for it this year, and we were talking over at the end of our 12 weeks, we did like a check-in, and one of the women who did it was talking about how she just felt really like intimidated about all of the art projects, and suggestions and exercises is the word I was looking for. And she was like, yeah, I have a really hard time starting anything because I'm so focused on what it's going to look like when it's done. I get too intimidated to start. And I was like, art is shit. Like every single piece of art is bad. And every single piece of art is good. Like it all depends on who is looking at it. And like the thing that you think is bad, someone else will look at and think is good because all of it's bullshit. And she was like, wow, you're right. Art is bullshit. And I think like people just need to maybe don't tell everyone that their stuff is bullshit, but like people need to have that like validation, I think, to be like, oh no, I can just pick up this like piece of paper and this art material that I have never used before, and I'll just figure it out. And if I don't like this one, maybe I'll try knitting. Like I felt that way. Like before I knew that fiber, especially with these also these boxes that we put ourselves in, that craft was not seen as fine art, even when I was going to school. I mean, when I went to Tyler, it was, but when I was still in high school, I didn't know that that was a fine art. And I didn't even think to apply to college using all my fiber art because I thought it was just a hobby that old ladies do. And now that is part of my career, I mean, it is my art practice. So it's we're putting these limitations on ourselves of oh, well, you're not actually making art because you make quilts. So you're over here with all the people that do these domestic activities, and the real fine artists are painters and sculptors, but only sculptors who carve stone or make things out of metal.
I think, you brought up, and we could always, go from, rather than Da Vinci Art Alliance, we could go Da Vinci Bullshit Alliance. And
no, where do I sign to change our name to that?
But it's a point well taken, and that's why I choose Bricolore. it just get away from the load of art. So when you're talking with people like quilt makers, you know, scrapbook artists, I mean, it just get away from art and just like you compositing images to share with one another. And that's why, you know, why I chose the Bricklore label is that it's not loaded. You know, it's what's that? Well, it's what you're doing, you know, kind of thing. It doesn't come down on anybody's head. You know, all this like bullshit about art, which just really distracts us from what art is really giving us. You know, I mean, I was, you know, it's just like, this needlepoint. I mean, you know, come on, it's wonderful.
I looked up bricoleur and it means a handyman, I believe in French. It's a person who makes things and that are useful.
It's a compositor. It's someone who brings stuff together. That's like you were talking about, you know, sometimes you assemble things. Well,
reassemble.
Well,
Disassemble and reassemble.
yeah, right. But see, well, I mean, that's why the whole Bricklore, you know, point is the very thing that Sam is talking about. You know, if we go out into the community and rather than talk about art, you know, or, you know, it's okay, it's a shot in the dark, you know, maybe Bricklore, you know, isn't the, but it's the way semantically, you know, we communicate with the community. I think it's imperative that we come up with a different vocabulary that opens up the door, as opposed to shutting it down. You know, like, oh, art, you know, and it's like, just do it. Don't think about it as art, you know, kind of thing, and make that, or at least I'm shooting in the dark. You know, it's just an idea. You know, maybe it'll work, maybe it won't, but we have to start somewhere.
The idea is to make something, to involve yourself in the making of something, and eventually you might actually grasp what you're possibly capable of and say, huh, why not? Yeah, let's go beyond. So that's how I got started.
Yeah, I mean, I really like, oh, Bill, go ahead.
I think that's where the fear is for a lot of people who say they aren't creative,
Yes.
because they want something to be perfect.
They want it to
at
be
the beginning
the first time around. It's not going to happen.
And I think this is what you're getting at, Sam, when you say it's, you know, all art is trash, because everything is an experiment. It's a failure in some way. I mean, I certainly feel this when I finish a print project. I have to put it in the drawer for a while and get away from it, because I've been fighting it for however long it takes to get it on paper. And then by that time, it is so far below whatever the imagined ideal I had that I couldn't quite bring into the world. So I had to put it away and get over that emotion. And then I can look at it and say, oh, not so bad. But it takes a while to learn that.
We're all
and
there.
I think that's part of
there.
I think it's part of the, it's easier to say I'm not creative than to face that struggle. And so how do we tell people that the struggle is the thing?
Mm-hmm.
That's the fun.
Yeah, I think it's a comparison too, where it's like, if you, like Bill, if you were in a situation where like you just spent all this time on this series of prints, you're not happy with it, it's stuck in the drawer, and then you go to a gallery and you see the print that you wanted to make hanging in the gallery. Like I don't think that you would stop making art, but there are other people that might have an experience like that, like who are new to a media that are really trying to get what's in their head out.
Yeah.
And they just aren't at that point where they can do that yet. or do something even like semi-related to it. And then they go to a gallery and they see someone that like I would view as like my peer. Like when I go to galleries and I see work that I love or like is similar to my own, I'm like, oh, this is someone who's thinking in the same way as me. And I'm really excited to exist at the same time as them and have this conversation, even if I never actually talk to them. But like someone who isn't empowered yet, I don't know if they would feel the same way. They might just like put the screen down forever, you know?
Yeah, I could see someone giving up and thinking, oh, well, they've already said the thing, so there's no point in me trying. They did it better than me. That's the competition thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So also, we have to break down. Yeah.
Not about competition. It's about fulfillment of self.
Right.
Well, I wanna bring this back to what David was talking about, especially in regards to the reading in the bricolage, in that he actually defines it really well in between the spaces of what the art object is and what the work of art is, which explains this phenomena of, while the art object is that communicative device, in contrast, the work of art is the transformation of undifferentiated components into a sensate or a motive device of communication. The act of transforming that, I think, sums up the role of the bricolage artist in such a wonderful way, while also, in many ways, combating the orthodoxy of the art markets that we've been talking about here, in that the many pressures of that orthodoxy and its kind of perceived elitism is fundamentally opposed to what art historically ought to have been. I mean, I think that you talk about this really wonderfully in here, is that you make the argument that the human history has illustrated that art is kind of on a personal scale, on an individual scale, is fundamental to human experience. But in kind of a more macro sense, outside of prehistory, art is what gives our culture its identity, its shape, and wonderful uniqueness in all its many assets. But when that is filtered through capitalism, kind of is the point of contention here, where things don't go as planned, and you get this kind of like breakdown of the role of art and its use in defining and shaping that culture, in the form of people being frustrated, people being kind of unenthusiastic of this fundamental part of being a human.
Excluded. I think
Yeah,
that's
excluded.
what-
Yeah, great. Yes.
yeah, which is what Sam was saying. Is like there's this aurora about it that excludes people from the thing that inherent tendency to put stuff together in whatever medium and my mother was a frustrated artist. She maybe all of this stems from well, no, she had to go to secretarial school. She couldn't go to art school, kind of thing. But and we were very modest, upbringing. But when holidays came around, what she would do was take poster paint and paint Santa Claus on the window, paint, Easter Bunny on the window, paint, flags and like for 4th of July and then, skeletons and pumpkins, So she, and that's what we could afford, but that's what she would do. And, it was just like growing up, that was just like, oh my God. Otherwise she was like very frustrated and then I have, all of that. But this was this wonderful outlet. Every holiday she get her poster paints out and she'd paint the windows, and it was just like, oh yeah. I mean, is it again, like I was saying, the quilting or needlepoint or, I mean, I don't gardening even, I don't care. It's that expression of self, that in the context of all the other crap that's going around you, to nurture, and again, we're talking about like community outreach and like building art, using art to build community. It's somehow or other we have to figure out how to nurture that impulse, and again, that's why it's like, get the art thing out of here, and let's just talk about the joy of doing these things, and that's the challenge of Fest, which I love the whole idea of Fest. There's this like, okay, how are we going to pull this off? But I mean that's it's I mean, for me it's just like,
Beyond labels.
I mean, I've had it with the art world, because it's so distorted. I just think the power of that fundamental impulse that we as humans have, and it's just we need to nurture and foster that, particularly given the situation we find ourselves in, in late capitalism, or wherever the hell we are, it's like, we have to turn away from, this capitalist model of, monetization and commercialization. Community isn't a commercial object. Community is, hey, well, I had some friends that went down to the exhibit, and it was a day there was the festival going on in the parking lot, and they thought it was so appropriate. They thought it was so great. Here's this music going on, and there's this, like, and I say, yes, that's yes, I mean, perfect. But serendipitous. But for them, it was like, yes, that it's that kind of it's kind of a contradiction. Nurtured spontaneity. So how do we nurture spontaneity in the community around us? To say, so it's try to peel back the intimidation. Just let that spirit come through.
Yeah, I mean, I love how you describe that towards the end here, where you say the art realm offers the potential, the possibility of acknowledging, fostering, sharing, and celebrating all the various kind of dimensions of humanity. I think if that were the defining characteristic of art that everyone knew, art would be rather less intimidating. It would be more kind of palatable to many. But you follow that up with saying that this kind of religious dogma, this orthodoxy of art as it exists within capitalism, within commodification of our current kind of social model, is they don't mix. So this question, I want to frame this question to you is, can art exist at all under the guise of capitalism, or is all art like anti-capitalist?
I think that what you find, and one of the notions I've always kind of fostered, and that's the art and the idea that I come up with, is that art should be approached just in the way that sciences are approached. That there, I think Sam mentions, like, okay, someone just loves color theory. Well, it's like, okay, that's like, quantum physics or something, fine, great. It's a part of this broader spectrum. So yes, art can exist, within that system, but I think that fundamentally that system, I think I've expressed this before, is destructive of community. That system is destructive of environment. It is destructive of the very fundamental components of survival, quite frankly. It's a very abstract system, but art is very flexible. So art can, obviously it has existed, in that system. The challenge, though, is just like, well, that for artists to say, well, yes, Damien Hirst, you can be, Jeff Koons, you can, it's just, I mean, there's people that do that. But that to me is a distortion to accommodate that system, and that at heart, at the core, when at the core, I keep going back to this, we are attempting to communicate to our fellow human beings at a very, very fundamental level, the joy, the amazing experience of being alive. And, capitalism doesn't do that. It's just competitive. It's just like beat each other down. It's just like, destroy the planet to make a profit,
How about those amazing soup cans by Mr. Andy Warhol? Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I was about 18 or 19 when those came on the scene, and I thought, what the hell? Whatever. Sorry.
Well, I mean, like, it's so wonderful that like an artist so kind of clever and subversive as Warhol was able to, within the realm of art, within the art market as well as the realm of art, could poke holes in the system and draw attention to that, corrupted system, which distorts the nature of what art kind of fundamentally wants to do.
But I think in the course of the 20th century, art was trying to figure out what it wanted to do. I mean, again, we have Duchamp, and it's like, okay, I'm gonna go play chess. But meanwhile, he's got an income from Arnsberg, for heaven's sake. I mean, it wasn't like it was just like no. I mean, he was totally linked and totally a part of the art scene. In his own particular manifestation. The process over the 20th century, I think, is that there's been this amazing, I think I allude to it, there's this amazing amount of research that has been going on, particularly post Second World War, with regard to, well, anyway, that this art thing isn't about making objects to go in some collector. There is something going on here And it was fostered, by, the Dadaist, all of the isms that, Fauvism, futurism, and even the WPA projects. I mean, whew, talk about a century where it's like, it's like, oh my God, Christo and anyway, it goes, it's just like the range of experimentation is absolutely unprecedented in Western culture, absolutely unprecedented. So the whole, to me, the message is that artists are trying to redefine, what it is that they do. And so it's been fascinating, to look at all of these different manifestations and all these different, attempts to poke holes. We'll poke here, we'll poke here, we'll poke here, and we'll and then to watch the capitalist market respond, try to figure out what the hell they're up to, going on, and then falling back into objectivization and commercialization and monetization of all of these amazing experiments that have opened our eyes. You can't think about color without thinking about Rothko. So Rothko to me is just like a nuclear physicist or something. He's so far out there, and art needs that. So that's why I go with art to me. Art to me is this big realm where all of these artists do whatever they're doing, but it's with the understanding that it goes to a bigger purpose. That there is a focus to it beyond monetary commoditization and get your work hanging in MoMA kind of thing. Christie auction for $1 million. That's bullshit. That's the bullshit.
Speaking of bullshit, I want to start a motion to rename Da Vinci Art Alliance Piero Manzoni Alliance. So the petition will be coming. For those who are not in the know, Piero Manzoni is the artist who canned his own shit and then sold it to a museum. Beyond that, though, I also enjoy how you are able to sum up a century of art history with an onomatopoeia. Excellent work. But what I really love is somewhere towards the end of this, you sum up a lot of these thoughts in a really wonderful way, where you say, somewhere along the way, our current reality was imagined, not in its wholeness, but through one series of actions at a time, and then go on to say that trying to imagine a new model that is kind of independent from the commodification of our current system of art, in that, quote, what that model ultimately may be is unknown, but without imagining and trying out different ones, nothing will change. And I really resonate with that message, and I think it was a really wonderful note to end this reading on. So thank you for that, and amen.
Amen.
Speaking of dogmas and ritual and orthodoxy and all those good things.
All right.
Oh, sorry, David.
No, go Tim.
When you were talking earlier, David, I was thinking a lot about and I have also been trying to figure out how to word this, like I do every time. I'm reading. I don't know if you remember. I chose a reading for critical theory like a year and a half ago that was called "The Soul at Work" by Franco Berardi. And I'm reading one of his other books right now called The Uprising that was written after the recession and then Occupy Wall Street. So he's talking a lot in it about, well, it's about poetry and like linguistics and like how we basically have been working within this like one framework of language and thought, and we have to move past it because capitalism kind of confines us to this box, and poets and artists are the ones that are able to transmute thought outside of this like capitalist mode of thinking. And with what you were just saying, I was thinking about how like, and thinking of that in the back of my mind the past couple of weeks as I'm reading this. Oh my God, where did the thought go? A dog just barked outside and now I lost it. Oh, about how like there's this like balance, right? That artists get, I think, where it's like escapism, but not I think it's like the balance of escapism that either goes into like disassociation from the world we're living in or meditation of the world we're living in, you know? So it's like we're operating in order to process our day and like what's happening around us, even if that's not intentional. I think that the act of creating something brings us into this space of processing. And the further, like what you were just saying of we're kind of operating outside of this like commercialized zone, and some of us are working within it and are like have figured it out. Like the people that are like selling their work out of these commercial galleries and keep doing the same thing or iterations of similar things, they've kind of figured out how to like get money, right? And those of us that aren't doing that are operating in this world where everyone's just like, what the fuck is going on over there? Like, I'm just gonna not pay attention. And I think the further into, and like Franco Berardi's thought is that capitalism is the highest form of fascism. And because we don't even realize we're in it, and that we are in this like limited mode of like what we're allowed to do and the world we're living in, which I'm still thinking through that, but think like if you're in that a little bit, the further we get into this and the further like dystopian world we're living in within capitalism as it fails and as they're trying to prop it back up, I think that that's why this experimentation is happening. We're all just like, let's just keep throwing stuff at the wall and like, we're gonna get through this.
Yeah, we're gonna. Yeah. I mean, that's the point we're at. You know that. And again, you know, I'm an old fart, and so I appreciate seeing three young faces here. That it's like, we have a challenge, and anything I can do to help you guys with that challenge, that's what I'm here for. I think Arden feels the same way, that we're,
Amen, as they say.
And again, that's the excitement of Da Vinci, is that, there's, for me, it's just like, oh, this is great. There's some people that actually see what the fuck is going on, and challenge themselves, with regard to, the whole art thing, and saying like, oh, okay, what I was fed, in school or whatever, it's like, ooh, well, that's, art's bigger than that. Art's about life, and life is bigger than, any given system. And, I see, well, I have no fond impressions of capitalism. I really, all I can see is, how it screwed things up. But it is so powerful and it's so prevalent. And one of the few areas where you can actually critically investigate those failures is in art. I mean, you're not going to find it, in an MBA program. Okay, all right. Liv,
You've been called on.
it's like you're not going to get away without. I mean, okay. I saw you move the cat.
He came off the windowsill and just was headed straight towards my keyboard, so I had to move him.
So we know you're sensitive.
Yeah, I think art is so easy that it is hard and vice versa. And I think with that, it is just this weird intimidation factor that plays in a lot of the time. Like you were discussing before, where it's just like how, like the actual act of making is the art, not necessarily the finished piece. And I think that's just like the act of exploring, and like what a studio practice isn't necessarily limited to like what happens inside of the studio. It's everything that you do during your days to explore, which is why I really like how you ended your booklet with a reading list and like further ways to keep learning about this and like keep digging into it. And in that, I think is just like sums it up. It's just like keep going. You know, there's not necessarily like an end product per se.
Yeah, we have in the past read a few of these, and I over the course of enough time, I'd like to read them all in critical theory here, because yeah, I know that these are going to be really good, and I'd be happy to do it. And just as both all of us here have been talking, and I realized something that I have not been able to kind of express until now, hearing the right amount of conversations, especially around the argument of like some people talking about art as escapism. And I have always cringed at that idea, and I didn't really know why or could find the right words to explain that. And I think you all have kind of gotten there. For me, is that art in the way that we're thinking about it, in the way that I'm thinking about it, is not naturally escapist, but rather it is kind of like a system of processing, of imagining or reimagining, exploring, hypothesizing, and in that it is not. It is generative. It is productive in all of these ways that are wonderful, that are usually not associated with escaping a system. Though escaping that system is a very fine goal that I think that I am doing. That is not a definition of escapism. Escapism implies that you can't get out. You're trapped in here and momentarily getting out for the sake of getting out. But I don't think that's what any of us are arguing for. I think it is a productive practicing for escape.
So I'm going to argue with you.
Okay, yeah, let's go.
Because I think that there are other connotations of escapism. Like if you think about the world of sci-fi, like reading a sci-fi book to me is escapism from our current reality into this other world that is basically navigating ours in like this imaginatory way, whether it's like a dystopian sci-fi book or Ursula Le Guin, which is like, I mean, she's also kind of dystopian, whatever, like hopeful, more hopeful sci-fi. And like, okay, I'm going to put this on the recording. My therapist, and I talk about disassociating a lot. And I always imagine it in this like very negative way. And disassociating is actually our body's response to negative stimulation to protect us. So my understanding of escapism, like I said, is not just negative or like against the idea of art as this like productive, great tool for ourselves, but also like we live in a shitty world. And my escaping into this world of art making to get away from this other, all this shit, I think is productive escapism, you know, and like being able to transport ourselves into these like imaginatory areas or hopeful, like I think my work is pretty dark. Like I talk about the housing crisis and gentrification and all these like awful politicians I'm yelling at all the time. If you listen to me yell, but like it's also hopeful, you know, like I make this work because I want to have these conversations with other artists that also talk about but don't do shit. And I'm like, hey, come to a zoning meeting with me so we can yell at these people together, you know. And like that's what, like when I'm making this stuff and like really angry in my studio and just like doing that in my head, is like for the hope that when I actually show it to other people, we can like act on it, you know? So like the escapism leads to connection.
Right.
Sure. Yeah, I think I'm on the same page with you here in that I guess my qualm is with a negative association with that word, though the positive should and has a place to stay. If we can have that middle ground.
Well, I think, you know, one of the things that, you know, the notion of escape is like Sam was pointing out, it's that when the shit's hitting the fan, you know, it's okay to duck, you know. It's like, I don't need this. It's you know, detrimental to my sense of well-being. It's detrimental, to my sense of thriving in life. And so, you know, okay, escape. Maybe there's another word that's better. I don't know quite what that might be. I mean, I said duck, but you know,
Duck and bones.
but again, that's me. I was like, okay, I'm always looking for another word that might, you know, be better or at least, you know, free from connotations. Like, you know, escapism is a loaded word. So, well, what's
Some
another?
some things are worth escaping from.
Yeah.
Well, you know, there's no question that I mean, I escape. I don't watch television. I don't listen to the news. I don't have any, you know, I don't have a newspaper. I mean, talk about escapism. It makes me crazy. So it's like, is that escapism? No, it's survivalism. You know,
Yes.
Right.
you know,
Yes.
it's and again, I think that's what Sam's talking about. You know, but yeah, and again, and Brian too. It's like, okay, it's negative connotation. It's really important. And again, you know, what do we do when we go into a studio? We shut everything else out.
Yeah.
You know, all right, it's me and my medium.
Right.
You know, and you know, and you know, it's like, well, yeah, it's all there, but you make this. It's this disciplined effort to cut the noise down, to get down to what you're quintessentially feeling, and what's going on in you personally, and pushing all this stuff away. You don't listen to CNN while you're in the studio. You know?
John Prawn does exactly that, and that explains a lot. Shout out to John Prawn, who I am going to convince to watch this whole thing.
Well, as you were talking about escapism, I was actually thinking about I think you were taking umbrage with escapism being only negative, and then making a case that escapism can be escaping toward life, not escaping from life. And so I was thinking there's actually three kinds of escapism. There's that kind where like we're thinking in the studio we're escaping from whatever and trying to be in a moment and understand ourselves. There's really negative escapism of addictions. I mean, I think that's what people end up falling into, is when it's easier to live their life, succumbing to alcohol or drugs or whatever. That's totally negative, life destroying escapism. There's also kind of a middle kind of escapism, as we were talking about other ways of defining craft as art. There's a whole world of hobbyists, people who do scrapbooking and is that mindless escapism? And are we trying to do something more mindful? And is there a distinction there? But am I now creating a more, some kind of hierarchy? I don't know. But I feel like that world of the hobbyists are the people who haven't fallen into negative escapism, that we want to try to bring into the community of art and make them understand that what they're doing is not that different than what we're doing. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm totally with you. That's why I like my purgatory analogy. Is they're on the first level. It's a good level. It's pretty good. They made it that
Maybe
far.
you're already at the first level of paradise. You're not in. Maybe it's not purgatory.
Well, why I say purgatory is because like Dante framed purgatory as ultimately a very good thing. Like it wasn't a bad place to be. It was just a place where you're like working. It's not paradise. You're in the thick of it. You're working. You're in the studio. And I feel like that's productive and a good place to be.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, everyone in purgatory canonically does end up in heaven. You can't go reverse for some reason. I don't know why, but apparently that's the rule. Don't ask me.
I'll keep that in mind.
Yeah, so as long as you're working, you're technically going to heaven. That's the only takeaway that we can have from this. Thank you for attending the Piero Manzoni Art Alliance lecture on.
I want to thank you all for joining me. It means a lot to me. Thank you.
Great fun. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, David,
Thank you.
for
sparking us.
Yes, for sparking all of this. This has been by far one of the most exciting exhibitions and times at Da Vinci Art Alliance. And so
Every day I find something new in David's exhibit to look at. Oh my God, Liv, what did we find the other day? The Mona Lisa in the trash.
Oh, okay, you found it.
The Mona Lisa.
ooh,
It's about time.
It's been a lot of fun.
those are fighting
Laughter
words.
is good. Laughter is good.
Yeah, fun.
Tell all your friends. David is also, tell all your friends, Liv, Bill, and Alden, that plus anyone who's viewing this after we record it and post it, that David is it October 14th? I think it's October 14th from 5 to 7. We'll be having a critique at the gallery
In person.
On the first floor for his first floor exhibition. And then on the second floor, we'll be critiquing Andrea Krupp's exhibition about carbon and the coal industry, which I am so excited for. I'm so interested in the connotation between David's work and Andrea's work. And I think this will be a lot of fun.
What day again?
Thursday, October 14th.
I think both Andrew and I will be there on the 17th for the open studio.
Mhm. And then there is going to be a potluck, which I don't even know if I told you yet, David. There's going to be a potluck from 5 to 7 on the 17th at the gallery. Well, the park and the gallery. We're having a neighborhood party at the
Great.
park.
And also Bill will be up on the 3rd floor during post, doing a bit of a pop-up there. And Lyndon, oh my God, Linda Dubin Garfield. I tried to mash all of those names into one. Lindarfield will be down on the street level with all of her wonderful prints as well.
All right, thank you.
All right.
Thank
Yeah,
you,
really.
David.
Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful night.